I'm Julia and welcome back to NB Library. Now you may be wondering, do I ever wear a different cardigan? And the answer is no, not unless it's in the wash. My mom got it for me for Christmas. So, from April 1st, 2025 to March 31st, 2026, I participated in the r/fantasy book bingo, and I'll link the original challenge post down below, but this is something that happens every year on the fantasy subreddit, where there is a 25 card bingo board. There's a hard mode for each card that you can participate in, and then people also do themed cards. Like I saw one that was all self-published books, all under the radar books, so less than 2,000 reviews on Goodreads, or all Jewish books, and I chose to do all books by BIPOC authors, which made some of these squares like really hard to source, but I did it and I finished all 25 squares. I had finished most of these a little while ago. I probably got halfway through, like a few months into the year. I was really excited out the gate. But you have a whole year to read 25 books, and that's not super difficult for me, and I love putting together a TBR for this kind of thing. The one that I ended up struggling with was the book club square. I was going to read Jade City, which I own, and then time just got away from me, and next thing I knew I needed to film this video like in the next 2 days, so I ended up reading something pretty short for it. I actually went through, because I was curious, and I did my average rating for all the books that I've read, and it came out to a pretty low 3.29. So something that I learned from this challenge is that forcing yourself to read books for a prompt can sometimes really backfire on you. Let's get started with the first row. The first card is Knights and Paladins, and for this one I read a book that I pretty enjoyed. It was Brighter Than Scale, Swifter Than Flame by Neon Yang. I really like Neon Yang's writings. I love their Tenserate series. I liked It'll Come to Me. It's a mech novel, their first like feature-length novel, and I've read their short stories. Like I really do try and seek them out, and this was their first new book for a while. This is a Tor novella, and I rated it 4.25 stars. It's sapphic, and it's like The Mandalorian. There's a character that never takes her armor off. There's a twist that I predicted from, like, I think seeing the cover and the title of the book, but really it's about like rediscovering your culture and reconnecting to your culture. This character like went away from her home when she was very young to join this knighthood, and then she's kind of been assigned to come back to the place she grew up and is relearning like what it means to be where she's from. And it got me through a really long car ride when I was helping my sister move across the state, so props to it for that. The next square on this row is Hidden Gem, and for this I read The Pauper Prince and the Eucalyptus Jinn by Usman Malik, who's a Pakistani author. This is a, I think, Tor.com like novelette. It's under 100 pages, and the problem for this one is that it had to have under 1,000 ratings on Goodreads. I can't remember now, but you know, under the radar. I did not put this on my TBR for this prompt, it just ended up working out. Some of these I read like a full calendar year ago, so I may struggle a little bit, but this one is about kind of like family lore. The main character's parents growing up in Pakistan post-partition and returning to that, and then it gets like kind of metaphysical space odyssey near the end, so that kind of brought it down for me, but I liked the like texture and details of it, but I did rate this 2.5 stars. Third book on this row, published in the 80s. This one is hard because I've read all of Octavia Butler's books published in the 80s, and I hadn't read Kindred, but that was published in 79. I had one backup book, but I ended up reading for this one Imaro by Charles R. Saunders. Kind of a like early classic entry in the sword and sorcery genre, one of the first books by a Black author to use African mythology, and I just didn't really connect with this one, unfortunately. I rated it 2.75, yeah? Oh, lower than that, 2.25 stars. I had to kind of like sit down in one sitting and force myself to get through it. It's sword and sorcery, and it is like kind of loosely connected short stories. I think that these these might have been initially published as short stories that the author like came back years later and revised and published in a book. Sometimes that can work for me. It didn't really work for me here because there are characters that he meets that he then just like moves on from. I think that the women in this book are treated really badly. I'm glad that I read it because I was curious about it, and I really wanted to try a book by this author, and kind of a like classic of the genre, just not for me. Next on the row is High Fashion. For this, I read this very early on, probably a week after the challenge got announced, but this was Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. I think I might have read this one early because I knew that I was going to struggle to find something for it. This was one that I read exclusively for this challenge. It was not already on my TBR, and God, do I regret that. I rated this 1.75 stars. I follow some people online who really like Elizabeth Lim. I think her writing is just too young for me. I think it kind of, it talks down to its audience a little bit. I think that the writing is like a little too simple. This just follows the like 500-year-old man with a 17-year-old girl trope, and I really didn't care for it, honestly. I also felt like the main character didn't have a lot of agency. This is a fantasy world based on Chinese history and starts out as a fashion competition, but then turns into a kind of map-trotting adventure story. And the weird thing is that the main character girl has this magic pair of scissors that helps her complete sewing projects very, very quickly. And she's like, well, that's cheating. I don't want to do that. And then like literally everyone around her is validating her and being like, no, 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 it's not cheating because you wouldn't be able to use it if you didn't already have magic. And you already have the skills, it's just enhancing your normal skills. And I felt like the author was trying to make that seem empowering, but it just made it feel like she wasn't good enough without a magic item. Yeah, I just didn't care for this one. Last book on this row was for the Down with the System card, and for this I read, unfortunately another dud, Rebel Skies by Ann Sei Lin. I love the cover of this one. I think I may have picked this up because I saw the second book in a bookstore and I love the cover of that one. I didn't continue with this series, but this one has, I believe, Japanese-inspired fantasy, and there's some really cool stuff with animals made of like origami. There's a twist in this one that I predicted from like chapter 2, but it felt like very, got it, like at the end, and pretty satisfying, where sometimes if you predict a twist early on, like it doesn't, but I think this book had enough other things going on. I also read this one really early on in the challenge, so I'm casting my mind back to April 2025. It was fine. I listened to it on audio and had some like Ghibli-esque elements to it, sky cities and sky ships, but it just lacked the sauce. And if I didn't already say, I rated that 2.75 stars. Moving on to the second row, the first card in this row was Impossible Places, and for this I read The Ashfire King by Chelsea Abdullah. This is from it's from a series, and the first book is The Stardust Thief. Super fun, Middle Eastern inspired fantasy, kind of working with some concepts and characters from 1001 Nights. The main character is the son of Scheherazade. There are actually 3 main characters, and I read this book for the Impossible Places square because 2 of the main characters are in this like underground Jinn pocket dimension, and then the 3rd character is kind of like back in their real world, and she has I think a Jinn in her head. She has a character in her head, and I love that trope. This also has a like older grumpy non-binary character. I loved them. I don't remember their name, but they're one of the like 8 Jinn monarchs in this lore, and they're the kind of character that like is always annoyed by the main characters, but if the main characters are ever threatened, they're like, hey, that's my friend. So I love that. I love just older non-binary characters, and it really shows how like my tastes are changing as I get older, where like I want to see and identify with the mentor figure, not the person being mentored, which I used to like always identify with. But it was just fine. I think this series is just like good fun. It's just a fun adventure story, and that's great, and we need more of those, but I didn't feel a lot of like emotional connection to the characters. I was just having a good time. So I rated it 3.5 stars. For the next square, A Book in Parts, this one was a hit, and if you've been watching me for a while, you would have seen this on my favorite books of the year video. One of my favorite books from last year, which I rated 4.75 stars, which I got the recommendation for from Reddit. It was The Sign of the Dragon by Mary Soon Lee, and holy shit, this book fucking rules. It's described as like the Goblin Emperor, but with Chinese and Celtic inspirations, and also it's a book in verse, and it's like 550 pages long. It's so freaking good. The main character, Shao, is unexpectedly made the like emperor king of his country. He is a horse whisperer, and he's the best boy, and he just cares for everyone and is so like wonderful and considerate to everyone, like kind of sometimes and very much sometimes to his own detriment, but just becomes beloved by everyone who meets him eventually because he's just so relentlessly good. And like of all the books that I read for this challenge, I recommend this one the most highly, I think. Next, for Gods and Pantheons, I read The Saint of Bright Doors by Vajra Chandrasekera. This is a retelling of the life of the Buddha. In particular, the main character is based on the son of Buddha, and this is in a world similar to our own. Like there's modern technology, but also just some like wild mythology going on, where if a door is left closed long enough, it will turn into a like magical door. And the main character, he goes to this big city and kind of falls in with this group of people that are researching the doors, and they are like watching them at all times to try and see when they're gonna open. And then his father, who's this like religious figure, is coming to town, and just things get really wild. It's a wild book, but I think that it balances kind of the absurdity with the mundane really well. And it's pretty minor, like it's not a big part of the book, but the main character is gay and has a boyfriend. And also his relationship with his mom and some other people from his past are really, really interesting. I wish we'd read more about his mom, because her like backstory when we get it is so fascinating and like really changes the course of the book, I think. But also like she really messed up her son. And if I didn't already say, I rated that one 3.75 stars. There is a moment at the end of this book that got me. Like I gasped and clapped my hand over my mouth, and I was like, no! I won't tell you why or what happens, but they got me. Yeah, they got me good. Next was last in a series, for which I read Secrets of the First School by T.L. Huchu. This is the 5th and final book in the Edinburgh Nights series, with main character 15-year-old Ropa Moyo, who's a Zimbabwean Scottish character. And this is urban fantasy. It's like kind of alternate history dystopian, where in the like, at least from what I can tell from the timeline and the ages of characters, it's like there was a huge economic downturn in the like 70s. People can't afford gas, and there's like famines and stuff going on, so people are barely scraping by. And this is a world where there are magicians, and they're known, and they're like part of the government. And Ropa, who is herself from this tradition of Zimbabwean ghost talkers, so not traditionally trained in this like government sanctioned magic, kind of gets swept up into this world and acts kind of like a 15-year-old would, who is underprivileged and living in a trailer and the sole provider for her sister and grandma, and that she just wants power and stability in a way that is very you're rooting for her, but you're also like, Ropa, you're making such bad choices because she's 15. This book wraps up the series. It brings back a lot of characters that I read the whole series, obviously, but I just kind of had like forgotten about and didn't care about. And the way it ends is like things are wrapped up, but life still kind of sucks for the main characters. So I thought it was kind of a downer. And that's like just purely my own feelings about it. So I rated it 3.75 stars. And last on this row is, as I mentioned before, the book club, a read-along book, which was for reading books that the fantasy Reddit had covered in a book club or read along, and I read The Labyrinth's Archive by Al-Mohamed. This is by a blind Middle Eastern author, and I'd had this on my TBR kind of off and on, and it's only purchasable on Amazon, and I don't have a Kindle, so I would have to read it on my computer, which isn't my favorite. I was getting down to the wire. Like, I read this like 2 days ago. It's a novella, and it's a really cool premise. It is set in this world where it's not explained super well because all the characters are like really familiar with the world and there's never an "as you know, Bob" explanation. But basically, it seems like they're on this hub world and there is this labyrinth of worlds that you can like explore and go to, but it's very dangerous. And so all of these like fantastical creatures and basically aliens come back to this world, and the archive are the people who record the world and the maps. And the main character wants really badly to be an archivist. She's pretty young, and she is blind. Not, I mean, fully, completely. She can still see like some colors and shapes, but her family does not think that she can be an archivist because of this. And the book is kind of talking about how she has to learn that it's okay, and other people around her have to learn that it's okay to rely on other people and not be an island unto yourself. And then her grandmother is found dead under mysterious circumstances, and it turns into a murder mystery. I thought the plot and the characters in this were just fine. It is sapphic, but really I was just interested in the world, and this is called a like, it's from the Broken Cities series, but I think this has been the only book in that series, so I definitely want to see more from this world because I think the world building and all the details were super interesting. All right, row 3. First book, parent protagonist. For this I read The Manor of Dreams by Christina Lee, which I rated, again, 2.75 stars. This book was fine. It gets into some things that I found super interesting. This is like contemporary horror, and there is this like cursed house that this family is living in, and we're seeing multiple different timelines, but kind of the matriarch and the grandmother of this family, whose death is the inciting incident, is a Chinese American woman who becomes a film star. This is kind of like Evelyn Hugo and the life of Anna May Wong, but moved up to the 80s. She marries a white man who at first seems just like very supportive. He's also an actor, but he starts to get jealous of her career. And then we're also following her daughters, a mom and her daughter from a family that was the staff of the people who lived in the manor. And there is this kind of Knives Out-esque debate about who gets to inherit the house and the will and all of this stuff. This book does a twist. It does the same twist twice, where it's like, how did they get away with that more than once? It has elements that I would really like. There are, like I mentioned, like stuff about actors in Hollywood, which I find interesting, and some sapphic elements, which I love, but all of the characters are like constantly at odds and keeping things from each other and at each other's throats, and that's a pretty big turnoff for me, just to my personal taste. And so just everyone in the book is like miserable all the time. It deals with some pretty tough domestic abuse, and then it ends with kind of an ambiguous ending of like, I see what I did there, where I was kind of like, why? But I'm not a big horror reader. That's why I rated that book as low as I did. I think that if not for the ending, it would have been like a 3 or 3.25, but I was just so fed up. Next book, for epistolary, I had a different book for a while here, but then I finally read The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. I was on the fence about it, but I got my friend a copy of an audiobook for Christmas, so I told him I'd read it along with him. And I ended up thinking this was just fine. I rated it 3.5 stars. I can appreciate the craft. This is a Native American vampire story, and it is told in multiple timelines. The epistolary format is a woman in the modern day finds her like great-great-grandfather's journal, and then we read his entries, and then we read the story that he is transcribing that a Native man in the early 1900s is telling him about his life. and all three of them end up connected in a very interesting way. It's my first full-length Stephen Graham Jones. I've read Mapping the Interior by him, and I think 1 or 2 short stories. And yeah, it was gory. Not for me. Aside from the parts where the priest and the vampire are talking, the vampire is like alone and isolated for a lot of the book. And usually what I find interesting and latch onto in books are relationships between characters. And so because he's so isolated for so much of it, I just didn't find it as interesting as I might have otherwise. Next, for published in 2025, I read The Deadly Fates by Dhonielle Clayton, and unfortunately I gave this one 2.5 stars. This is a middle grade series in the Conjureverse. It used to be called the Marvelerverse, but the series name changed partway through. I think that might have happened for Gideon the Ninth actually as well, but anyway, I loved the first book, The Marvelers. It's a great magical school book, so much whimsy, just so fun. Book 2, I started to get a little worried, and then book 3 made me stop reading the series. There's just too many plot points in this book, and the pacing is so breakneck, and there are so many details, like whimsical world building details, that it's like, I mean, you know, you're reading it, obviously not watching it, but if you're watching it like on a screen, it would be like a visual overstimulation, because it's like, we don't even have time to think about the thing that just happened. We gotta get to class, and on the way to class, this thing's gonna happen, and this guy's having this problem, and then there's like 10 plot lines going on that they keep like cycling through, and so you never have a chance to catch your breath, and neither do the characters. Like in this book, the main character is like kidnapped and then escapes, and then she doesn't tell her parents about it or even think about it until like 5 chapters later, because they've got so much going on, and then it like never comes up again. And also, this is a little bit of a spoiler, so spoilers for the 3rd book of a middle grade fantasy series, but her mentor figure, who's pretty important to the backstory of the villain, dies off screen. So I just feel cheated. I feel like the author didn't really care about what happened to him, and the main character is like sad, and he had a son who also goes to the school who's like sad, but it's like, I didn't see this guy die. Like, there was no like heartfelt goodbye. We didn't really spend all that much time with him. And he's not her only mentor figure. He's more prominent in the 1st book, but yeah, it was just such a weird choice, and it felt like there's no time, we gotta move on. So I was disappointed in that one, unfortunately, but like, I'm rooting for this series. It's a magical school book by a Black author, and it's talking about African-American, like voodoo and traditions like that, but just, there need to be half as many things going on, and then I think it would be more successful. Next, for author of color, I read Don't Sleep with the Dead by Nghi, which is the sequel to The Chosen and the Beautiful. It's a novella that is like The Chosen and the Beautiful is a magical Great Gatsby retelling, and then Don't Sleep with the Dead is the sequel to that, so it is like in the late 40s, I think, kind of after the events of The Great Gatsby. The main character, I mean, it's Nick is the main character, and he's just a really unpleasant guy, and I was rooting against him, honestly. Small press, oh wait, I forgot to tell you the rating. I gave that 2.75 stars. Moving on. For small press or self-published, I read The Spectral Hue by Craig Lawrence Gidney. I've read a short story collection by Gidney. This is the first published novel of his. I ended up really liking this. Like, very literary, beautiful, queer characters and relationships. This is kind of based on the history of Gee's Bend, which is this tiny, mostly Black town in the South that is known for making quilts. And this book is set in, I think, Maine, in a tiny town on the coast where people are known for creating all kinds of art with this really specific like hue of magenta. It's almost like this like red purple, and all of the main characters are drawn to this town for different reasons. Kind of our main character is this young art student who's studying this particular like color and little like sub art community in this town, and this like kind of supernatural quality of the art and the way that it draws you in, and kind of tying to this town's past relationship with slavery and enslaved people, and kind of a ghost story, but also a great character study for these 3 characters, 2 of whom are gay men and 1 of whom is a lesbian. And my only complaint about this book really is that it ends immediately after the like climactic line and you're just like, whoa. Otherwise, yeah, I thought it was really good, and I rated it 4.25 stars. Penultimate row, first book in the row. For the Biopunk Square, I read Loka by SB Divya. This is the sequel to Meru, which is like really underrated book that I'm looking at it on my shelf right now, in a series that I hope SB Divya is going to continue. And Meru is much more like, well, part of it is like The Martian, where a character is stranded on a planet by herself. It's queer, it's talking about a lot of like meaty concepts. Loka is about the main characters of Meru's daughter, and it's set in this world where humans, you know, have done global warming and all kinds of destruction to the planet, and there are these beings called alloys that are like, they're kind of hard to explain. They're like cybernetic AI robot humans. They're still humans, but they can present in like a variety of different like forms and genders. They can be like enormous, and their bodies can travel in space, and they can have versions of their bodies that live on Earth. Kind of the big debate in this series is the alloys are like 500 years ago decided to confine the humans to Earth and keep their population down, and kind of like not do full eugenics, but like keep certain genetic things like modified because they can do that, including like taking out the genes that make people want to explore. In Loka, the main character and her best friend, who's non-binary, decide to do this like circumnavigation of Earth without using alloy technologies. They're like walking on bikes or on boats for a lot of it, and so it's kind of like a travel or through hiking story, but in the future. And so it ends up being like pretty low stakes. There is a moment that's like surprisingly like dark and tense, but the rest of it is just like a little bit Monk and Robot-esque. I think just some of the writing choices in this are kind of like weird, or like the language is kind of off. Same with Meru. I connected to Imaro a little bit more, and so I rated this one 3.25 stars. But I will be continuing with this series, and I'm curious to see where the like central tension of the series is going. I have a copy here. For Elves and Dwarves, I read Cast in Shadow by Michelle Sagara. This was a really hard square for me because it was hard to find books with elves or dwarves by BIPOC authors, especially ones that I hadn't already read. This is a like 20-book secondary world urban fantasy series, and there's this race of people called the Baryani, which are basically elves. So I'm cheating a little bit because they're not specifically elves, but that's how I like view them. This is a weird one. I rated this 3 stars. One of the weird things is the main character is like 20, and every man she meets is like enamored with her. I mean, that's kind of, you know, urban fantasy trope, right? And there's some like interesting world building going on. It reminded me quite a bit of the Watch books in the Discworld series, where like it's set in a city, they don't really leave the city, and it takes place over a short period of time. There's a lot of points in the dialogue where it's like the main character like doesn't say something, and then someone else is like, I intuit what you didn't say, or like someone implies something, and the main character is like, I knew what he implied, and so I'm going to jump 3 steps ahead and then say out loud something tangentially referencing something you didn't say. And so the whole time I was like, what is going on? What are they saying? I don't think I'll be continuing with this series. I really wanted to find like a 20-book series that I could really dig into. I am keeping this copy just for this video, and I will be donating it. Next, for LGBTQIAP+ protagonist, I read When the Tides Held the Moon by Venessa Vida Kelley. And I rated this one 2.75 stars. I don't think this is a bad book, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I'm glad that I own a physical copy because it is illustrated by the author, which is really cool. Let's see if I can find you one. It's a beautiful book, like the way it's put together. We've got these borders in front of every new chapter, and then minimal color illustrations, like just gorgeous. It's gorgeously put together. It reads like the Shape of Water fan fiction, but also it started out as Carry On by Rainbow Rowell fan fiction, which is in itself Harry Potter fan fiction. So we're like 3 levels of fan fiction deep. I think that my main complaint that just kind of annoyed me with this book, aside from the fact that it just plays out like, I mean, the ending is the climax of The Shape of Water. Sorry for spoilers. There are some parts that are like supposed to be really like beautifully and flowery written. It reads to me like you just open the thesaurus, where it's trying to use a lot to say little, where what it should be doing is using a little to say a lot. And I had read The Last Dragoners of Balzabar by Indra Das a few months before this. That book is gorgeous. One of those beautifully written books I've ever read, and it's a novella. And this book is trying to do like beautiful flowery writing, and it's just not hitting the same. It's not being like Le Guin. I think a lot about this Le Guin quote where she says, the artist puts into a picture what cannot be put into words, and the poet puts into words what can't be put into words. And also, because I forgot to tell you what this book is about, the main character like goes to work at a circus in like 19-teens Brooklyn. He's Puerto Rican, and he helps capture a merman and build the like glass cage for a merman, and is not directly keeping him captive, but like is aiding and abetting the person keeping him captive, and so it's just kind of hard to root for their relationship. Wow, I read 3 in a row of books that I own at completely different times. For 5 short stories, I read the anthology Never Whistle at Night, which is all dark fiction and horror short stories by Indigenous authors. As with any anthology, of course, you know, these stories are hit and miss. There's a story in here that starts with the graphic rape of a child, so please look up trigger warnings before you read it. There's also literally the worst short story I've ever read is in this book, where I got to the end of it and I was like, I have no idea what just happened. That was completely obfuscated to me. Literally, I didn't understand a single word I just read. There's also a story, and I'm sorry to complain, there's a story where it is set up like it's an unreliable narrator, where the narrator at the end was like, yeah, I knew all that bad stuff was gonna happen, but in the moment, he doesn't know. He acts like internally like he's just as scared as everyone else. It's like the author got to the end of the short story and went, he knew the whole time, and then didn't go back and change it. That really bothered me. Unfortunately, I feel like the first like 3 or 4 short stories are the good ones, and then there weren't very many other good ones after that. Sorry to say. I rated that a 2.75 stars. Really seeing a theme here. For A Stranger in a Strange Land, I read City of Stolen Magic by Nazanin Ahmed Pathak. This is a middle grade book, and it is a historical fantasy about a history very much like our own, the 1850s, where magic is real and the colonization of India is kind of being fueled by magic, both from Britain and to go exploit the magic of Indian natives. The main character's mother gets kidnapped by British men, and she has to go to Britain along with her mom's friend to try and get her back. And then meanwhile, there's also this other storyline of these 2 boys that gets added in, and there is some really great commentary on both colonialism and labor strikes and unions. But I unfortunately felt like this one was a little bit out of focus, and I think that there could be a really like tight book, but the adding in the like boys plot line I felt like really drew away from who I thought the main character was going to be, and so I thought that that part could have been like changed. I also just kind of wanted to see like more female characters in this story, and I think there was a way to do that based on the characters that were there. That was just kind of a missed opportunity. I give that one 3.25 stars. On to the last row, you have the option to recycle a bingo square on this square, and so I used Mythical Beasts from the previous year, and I read a hit, which was Vanya and the Wild Hunt by Sangu Mandana, another middle grade fantasy, which was one of my favorite books of last year. This is another magical school story, but this one was just, oh, it was so good. The main character is just so well drawn, such a great character, so brave, and has such agency and drive in her own story where, you know, it's hard in middle grade fantasy to find reasons that the kids are doing what they're doing. And I think that it all made sense in here. There's an incredible twist at the end, and also some like really interesting conversations about like the nature of evil and like, is evil innate or is it our deeds that make us evil? Hashtag justice for Baba Yaga. And I'm really, really looking forward to the second book in this series. This was just such a joy to read, and I highly recommend it. And I gave it 4.75 stars. For the cozy SFF square, I read The Potency of Ungovernable Obstacles by Malka Older. This is the third book in the, I think it's Massa and Pleady Investigate series, but this is a series of novellas that are sapphic, cozy mysteries set on Jupiter. I love the world building here. I like the characters. The problem is the writing. The author uses, like, I've never had to look up so many words while reading, and luckily I read these on my e-reader, and so I could just like click on the word and have it defined for me. But sometimes I just can't tell what's going on in these books, and then sometimes I can't find the definition to a word because it's a made-up space word. I also thought that the plot of this one was really boring. The first book is kind of a like reintroduction, second chance romance for the main characters. This is a very like Holmes and Watson dynamic, which I love. In the second book, they do some traveling to other places, which is interesting. And then this book is just like academic drama, and I just didn't care. And I felt like the main character like didn't acquit herself very well. She was just kind of like acting foolishly the whole book. I don't think I'll be continuing this series, unfortunately, which like, it's a sapphic Holmes and Watson story set in space. It should be perfect for me, but I just wish that the writing was better. So I gave that 2.5 stars. All right, for the generic title square, I'm not going to read off all of them, but this was like, read a book where the title includes like sword or blood or song. And so I read A Song of Legends Lost by M.H. Allende. This one was really promising. I think this is going to be like a good book for a lot of people. It wasn't for me personally for some like specific reasons. One is big cast, and we spend so little time with the most interesting characters, and I don't mind a big cast, but my pet peeve in big casts is if POV characters just keep getting added and you never know when we're finally at capacity and we can like go, okay, these are our characters, I'm gonna get invested in them. But it's really hard when just like new POV characters keep cropping up, and we'll go like entire sections of the book with like 2 POV characters, and then we switch away and we like don't see them for 300 pages. There's some really interesting world building here. It's a world where like nobility can call on their ancestors to help them fight in battle, and there's also this like, seems to be, it's a bit obfuscated because it's fantasy and they're using like language that they can understand to apply, but it seems to be like they're getting attacked by robots. And there are also like all kinds of different cultures across this world. So there's multiple like Black and I believe Asian coded characters, but I could be wrong about that. That's how I interpreted them. But my main thing with this book, aside from the POVs, is that all of these characters are terrible people. And I think that like the politics and the world building of this could be super interesting to some people. I kind of have to be able to root for the characters. There's one character in this that I am sympathetic towards, who is like the kind of main character on the back of the book, and I feel like she was barely in it. She also had, there was a bit of a guy in your head trope going on there, which I like, but just everyone else was terrible, and there was even like a character that I thought was, I was like, oh, you're cool, thank God, and then like someone gets like ripped apart right in front of her. She's like, oh, okay. I'm like, God, not again. And so like just everyone sucks, and I kind of just had a bad time. Oh, one thing I will say about this and about the big cast is that there is a cast list at the beginning of this book, but I feel kind of like, authors, be confident in your ability to like reintroduce a character that you haven't talked about for a while, and trust that you are a good enough writer that they'll have stuck in my mind and I'll remember them. Because when I see a cast list at the beginning of a book, I just get intimidated. But like, there's no cast list in The Goblin Emperor, and I can tell all those characters apart just fine. I mean, I've listened to that audiobook like 10 times, and having it on audio helps because the narrator does individual voices. But like, my point stands that like, if you don't have a cast list, like, I am smart enough to remember who the cast is, except for Dandelion Dynasty. I did keep flipping to the front of the book, but that's a different issue. Either have few enough characters that you don't need a cast list, or make the characters distinctive enough that you don't need a cast list. But I digress. Penultimate book, penultimate square. Not a book. This was watch a movie, play a game, and keeping in me wanting to have BIPOC authors, I wanted a BIPOC genre film. I did watch Sinners, so I could have had that for this square. Good film. For this square, I chose Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I hadn't seen, and I loved it. Oh my gosh, it was so good. Like, by the end of the film, I was just like watching the screen like, really beautiful, like absurd, silly, but just like ultimately about family and not passing on what your parents passed down to you. And I rated it 4.5 stars. Last square was Pirates. I also really struggled with this one. I struggled to find I love books about pirates. Struggled to find a book by a BIPOC author about pirates that I hadn't read before. I squeaked by with this one, but this was the kind of under the radar indie published No Shelter But the Stars by Virginia Black, which is a sapphic sci-fi romance, and the main character, although she is not a pirate, gets called a pirate like twice by the other characters, so I'm counting it. But this is a world where there is a like large space empire, and then a kind of like the remnants of a colonized empire that don't have a planet anymore, that are like on the move in a fleet constantly, and the heirs of both of those civilizations both like crash land on a planet enemy mine style. And I love survival in space, like I was talking about Meru and The Martian, just kind of like any survival genre story. I love the like search for food and trying to like engineer things that work, and just where characters have to like use their wits and rely on each other or themselves to survive. I find just super compelling. This is like a really well done enemies to lovers, where they hate each other's guts for like the first quarter to third of the book, but they have to like come to rely on each other and trust each other and like fall in love. And there's a really interesting dynamic to their relationship of this one character is this kind of monk and starts teaching the principles that she believes in to her lover, and that becomes this like thing tying them together, and kind of this like serenity in meditation that they both feel. Yeah, I really liked it. I would love to read more books in this vein. I'm about to start reading The Blighted Star, and I think it might be similar. So I rated that one 4.25 stars. That's the 24 books and 1 movie that I read/watched for this bingo. Lessons that I learned. I think next year I'm going to try my hardest not to force myself to read something. I still want to do a themed board, but I might choose like all queer books or all indie published or female authors, something like that. I also forgot for this challenge that you can substitute one square with like a square from a previous year, kind of like the freebie, like substitute a square from a previous year. And I wish that I'd done that. I also wish that I'd maybe like paced myself a little bit more on these, because like maybe I just got like burned out or overwhelmed, but I really thought that I was going to be able to finish Jade City, but it's also like a pretty long book to be able to read in like a few days before I needed to film and edit this. But I'm not letting the low average rating deter me for next year. I'm excited, I'm ready to go, and looking forward to seeing what the new challenges are. So thank you very much for watching. I'll be back next week with my March wrap-up, which is going to be very interesting because I had a long period where I didn't read this month, and then I read some eclectic things. So I will see you a week from now. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and that's going to be it for me. Bye!